Building successful teams is critical to implementing racial equity in government.
Why do we need a team? No one individual can make and implement the changes we need to drive toward equity. A team approach enables us to build support in the organization, to recruit a variety of skills and talents, to develop a workable plan, and together implement the best ideas for change. There's three things that we need to think about: training, infrastructure, and leadership. By training, what I mean is that we have to have the skill to be able to do our jobs differently. When we're talking about race and racial equity, we're not just talking about individual people. We're talking about institutions and how institutions are designed. That means that we have to have a shared analysis, and we also need to think about developing skills. We need employees positioned within government who can actually think about racial equity within the context of their own jobs.
The other benefit of training is that it provides an opportunity to assess who in your organization is currently holding a deeper analysis, and who are the folks who are willing to take chances in advocating for change institutionally. It's an effective mechanism at really looking at who has the current skills and the passion to move the work.
In building infrastructure to transform government to advance racial equity, we need to think about the breadth and depth of the organization. Too often we have thought about racial equity within isolated positions. Our vision has got to be creating that infrastructure from frontline staff to middle management and to leadership. That we have to have the organization actually structured in such a way that we're advancing racial equity across all areas. When we're talking about infrastructure, there's also many areas that there's overlap between departments. And so with a topic like sustainability, we might have sustainability offices, but the truth is that sustainability also includes people from areas like planning and development, utilities. We have to think about building bridges, getting people out of their silos so that we're collaborating to look at racial equity across a topic area.
In terms of building internal capacity, power mapping is key. Power mapping is recognizing that decision-making within the institution is occurring within specific places. I think it's very easy, especially within government, to imagine that all the power resides within elected officials. But in reality, power within government is distributed across the institution. And in mapping out where real decisions are being made, it allows us to think about more constructively where are the points of intervention for change.
We know that having top-level leadership, and that includes management, department directors, and elected officials, aligned and supportive of racial equity is absolutely critical. It can get conveyed through things like accountability agreements between elected officials, between a mayor or city manager with department directors, changing the expectation so that racial equity is incorporated into the routine expectations of people's jobs.
In the city of Seattle, one of the models we looked at in really thinking about organizational change was tipping point. Tipping point theory is just this assumption that in order to get to organizational change, a critical mass must occur, at which point the organization literally tips in a new direction. Tipping point theory that we used in Seattle was fairly basic. It was the assumption that there's a small group of people who work as advocates on any given goal for institutional change, and that there was a broader group of folks in the middle who, if you could move, that you would actually move the entire institution towards change. And the basic breakdown was, how do we get roughly about 30% of employees to think about what it means to advocate for change? How do we get another 30% who were more typically in the middle to agree with going along with that change? And how do we allow what is the most active resistors, 10 or 15%, simply not to matter in our calculations in terms of thinking about institutional change?
I have spent many years working with people of color and immigrants and refugees in Washington State and around the country. Through that work, I have really seen that the issues of environment and public health and how people live their lives are all inextricably linked. And so when I had the opportunity to come to the city of Seattle and to advance racial equity in our environmental programs as part of Seattle Public Utilities work, I was really excited. In the first year of the initiative, we are creating, in partnership with the community, a co-owned equity and environment agenda. Internally, to move the work on race and environment, we have actual staff who are participating in a race and social justice initiative more broadly. As an initiative, we are also looking for opportunities to partner with other departments to make sure that we're bringing along the other departments in our understanding. Everyone is at different points in their ability and understanding of engaging around equity. So some of our work with the initiative is to be a few steps ahead and bringing folks along. One of the biggest pieces of this initiative is figuring out and making sure that all of our communities benefit. We know that in Seattle and across the nation, people of color, immigrants and refugees, limited English proficiency communities, and low-income individuals often are the ones who bear a disproportionate burden of environmental injustice. We're putting those communities first. And we know that when we set the table in a way that allows communities who are not often at the table in the first place or often are thought of at the end of a process, when we put them at the beginning, we know that the process will not only work for those communities, but it will work for everyone. And so that's why we, through this initiative, has created a community partner steering committee made up of 16 people from all of these various communities. Make sure that we have deep and authentic conversations with communities across Seattle about an equity and environment agenda for the city of Seattle.
I got a real awakening when I worked with a Danish firm named Gale Architects. They're famous for helping make livable cities. I was part of an organization that brought them to Seattle to do the most in-depth study of pedestrian and bike life of any center city area in the country. And we did a deep map of how people use the city. We walked every alley and street and mapped it for 40 different quality characteristics. And that was used to change street typologies and other kinds of policies in the city of Seattle. In that process, it reinforced for me how we should be rethinking some of these questions around racial and equity issues and asking, are our policies and procedures heading in that direction? And what kinds of policies and procedures do we need to get ourselves there? And what kind of innovative solutions or private pilot projects can we fund to help us move in that direction? We should be the catalyst on these things. We should be nudging people to move forward. An example of the work we're trying to do to nudge people forward in Seattle is to bring together a citizens commission on environment, infrastructure, and equity. And this would be composed of mainstream environmental groups which largely have the technical know-how to get changes in very complicated transit policy or pedestrian policy or other kinds of things around stormwater, and grassroots groups which are largely people of color, which actually have the know-how on the ground of what people actually need. Those groups often don't have the bandwidth to enter into these long, protracted, very technical conversations that happen at the policy levels. So Loom Foundation and a few other foundations in Seattle, the Seattle Foundation, Bullet, and Social Venture Partners, are bringing together a group of these folks to create a transmission belt between the on-the-ground folks and the grass tops folks so that the needs of people in their everyday lives are translated into the policy terms that we can use to pull levers and change policy in the government.
While each of these approaches originates from a different sector, there are a number of commonalities. First, both use the equity lens established by the Seattle Race and Social Justice Initiative as a starting point. A common framework matters. Second, both approaches acknowledge the importance of recruiting a broad spectrum of support and expertise. The issues we face are complex and often will take multiple skills to address. Most importantly, both projects hold community participation as a vital component of their work. We cannot create solutions to racial bias without the input and expertise of people who actually have experienced racial inequities.
So what does it mean to get started on moving your own effort in your own jurisdiction? How do you get started with a new team?
Who are the best recruits for a racial equity team? While there's no prototype for a best team member, here's some criteria for you to think about. Representation of key leaders, including electeds and appointed officials, as well as on-the-ground leaders. Teams should also include people with key skills, people who have skills with facilitation, legal, program, or community engagement. Some team members will bridge between institutions and community-based organizations. It is important to recruit team members who have a breadth of skills and are able to be good messengers for the overall initiative.
So what will the team do? Team members will lead the implementation of racial equity tools. They will work to recruit allies and address the concerns of skeptics, work directly on policies and proposals, and finally work to popularize the value of a racial equity approach. So where does the work of the team begin? We define what we hope to change. We have a plan. We expand our base by recruiting potential allies. We also need to address any concerns of any detractors or skeptics. And ideally, we have top-down and bottom-up support. We need to identify short-term opportunities as well. This might include adoption of a tool, training, or a policy or practice change. Bottom line is that teams need to be given something to do that's concrete and can result in a significant outcome.
Development of racial equity action plans within each department were really useful tools for people to think about how racial equity was relevant for their own program areas. It allowed employees to apply their own skills and their own expertise at the same time that they were breaking down silos across program areas. We understand that changes in behavior drive changes in attitude. So when we developed racial equity plans, what that meant is that people were incorporating racial equity into their routine operations. They were thinking about racial equity from a day in, day out basis. Those changes in behavior really drove changes in outcome.
As we think about starting this work, it sometimes can feel a little overwhelming about where to begin. So we want to lay out 5 critical steps to success as we get started in moving a racial equity agenda in your organization. First, we think it's critical that you start out with knowing what you're hoping to change. What is it that you're clear you have the opportunity to impact? Second, once you determine what it is that you're hoping to have an impact on, it's important to know who your allies are in doing that work. You can think about that in terms of not only who your peers and fellow staff might be able to support you in your work, but where can you find allies in community? And for that matter, where is your biggest support in leadership or from elected officials? Third, once you have a sense of both what you're trying to impact and who are the advocates and fellow partners that you have in supporting to make that change, it's important to do a little bit of power mapping. And all we mean by that is figuring out where are the decision points that are occurring within your organization, and how does your organization currently make decisions and hold power. To our 4th step, where are there opportunities for education? So as you're thinking about both moving your agenda, being clear about where the decision points are being made, who is it that you actually think needs more information, and how are you going to deliver that information? Finally, 5th step is really thinking through what are some short-term wins. It may be that the work that you're hoping to change has much longer-term implications, but thinking through creatively what are some short-term wins and how you share them to actually keep momentum moving for your work is absolutely critical to success.
By taking these steps, you'll be well on your way to building a racial equity team. We wish you the best of luck, and remember, if you run into difficulties, we're here to help.